We are going to go right back into this week. It is the second sermon of the Come Together series. I don't know if I'll get in trouble on video, but how many of you remember that song, Come Together Right Now? Right? Immediately thought of that song. Now, I know that we might get into some copyright and trouble, or maybe that video might be banned. Probably, right? Because I said that. They'll ban the video, but oh well. God wants his community to come together. God believes in togetherness. If God didn't, he would have had a total different idea of the church, the body, functioning together would have looked totally different than it does. Doesn't God have bigger plans or bigger ideas or bigger schedules than to choose the Lord's Day, Sunday, for all the community to gather together? I could have come up with something better than that. But see, God chose the community of believers to come together for a purpose, for a reason. He says in Hebrews chapter 10, let us stir one another up. Look on the wall there. It says, and let us consider how we may spur one another toward love and good deeds. That was the reason that we come together, is that we look to see how we can stir one another up in love and good deeds. That is the reason to come together. Now, some people like the next verse, Hebrews 10:25. We've heard that one numerous times. Not forsake the assembling among yourselves as the habit of some, but encouraging one another as you see the day draw near. We seem to be real heavy on the passage that says, not forsake the assembling among yourselves. But we also go real lightly when it says, not forsake the assembling among yourselves, but encouraging one another. That was the purpose of the church coming together, to bring encouragement. Don't abandon the assembly. Don't abandon the idea of togetherness. That was God's design. And how do you encourage one another if you're absent? How do you stir one another up if you're not there? You see, what I'm suggesting this morning is sometimes going to church isn't about you. It merely might be about someone else that you came and you got to encourage or stir someone up. Are you looking for that? Or do you have to hurry and get into the assembly so nobody gets your seat? You're sit right there and you're all comfortable. You're like that hen in its own nest. You just get all comfortable and you get all seated in. And then we have no connect with anyone. That's not God's purpose. God didn't say, hey, I want you to be here just to be here. But I think that's what we've been taught numerous times is you can't miss it. You can't miss it. We become dogmatic about you can't miss it. But then you ever wonder, kids, we think sometimes, and sometimes they do back talk or they do, but not all the time that a kid says why is defiant. If a kid says why, not always should we assume that child is being defiant because they're asking you questions. It might be you're mad because you don't have an answer, other than because I told you so. But, so we have the question, God says, not forsake the assembling among yourself as the habit of some. Why? But I love God's response because he gives us the answer. Don't miss the assembly. Don't forsake it. Why? So you can encourage one another. So you can stir one another up into love and good deeds. We've got a purpose to come together. Did you think about that this morning when you came together and say, who can I encourage? Who can I encourage? Who can I stir? What about that person that's been coming for the last 4 weeks and nobody seems to be talking to them? I'm going to be the one to reach out to that one and encourage them. Are you listening? God wants us to have unity in our community. It's essential to breaking down barriers and promoting the gospel to a world that's fragmented and rife with hyper-individuality. We're going to examine ourselves and our lives and our church community and how we as a person and as a community walk in unity. Now, one of the biggest things about living in a community is working with different people. Now, I find it very simple to deal with people and work with people who think like I do. That's right. You see, you can agree with me or you can be wrong. Because I'm always right. So if I could find a group of people, Steve, who would always agree that I'm always right, guess what? I won't have conflict. But where does conflict come in? Is when I find someone who doesn't think I'm always right, and I always want to be right. Are you with me? You'll find people like that who are always in conflict. It's a matter of time. Why? Because you won't find people who always agree with you or who always thinks you're right. But we are working with people who have different personalities. Let me tell you, during Vacation Bible School, I saw a whole lot of different personalities, different opinions, different ideas. Like I said, Ben didn't ask my ideas about the decoration. I was a bit offended. Man, they do such a good job in that decorating department. I said when we were at the little building, we had big crowds, and we had a lot going on, but we never had the decorations that we have here. No doubt about it. Where were you then, Ben? No, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. But we're going to have to deal with people who have different opinions, different personalities, different ideas, differences in leadership style, differences in visions, differences in main callings, Christian communities. But many times, Christian communities are pulled apart. They're severed. They're destroyed because we think that everybody has to look at it the same way we do. I've always said this in marriage counseling. The worst thing you could ever do is to make your wife act and look and think just like you do. The worst thing that you could ever do is to make your husband act and think and be just like you are and agree with everything. Why do I say that? Listen, we're talking about unity. This is an old Southern slang, but it's true. You can tie a dog and a cat's tail together and you'll have union, but I promise you, you will not have unity. That's what a marriage does. When you have just one side where everything has to be your way, oh, you're together, but you're not happily together. You have union, but you don't have unity. It causes strife. It causes trouble. And people get angry. You can see the sense of anger when people don't have others agree with them. Why? Because they only have, the problem is they have a false picture. They've already pictured what everything should look like. And anybody who comes in with a brush with a different color messes with their picture. So they have this perfect picture and this idea of how everything's supposed to be. And if you trip that up or you do something different or you speak out or you come with a brush that's different color, you are the enemy. The problem is many of you have fake, false pictures and ideas. Because that's not the society or the world that we live in. People are going to challenge us. They're going to be different. And in many ways, you will find the difference isn't in opposition. It actually complements. It actually, when you engage with that, it's complementary. So, because Ben didn't ask me to do the decorations or help do the decorations, it turned out really good. Because if I would have wanted my right, well, they should have asked me, it wouldn't have nearly looked as good as it did. Why? Because people have different ideas and better ideas. Better ideas. Here's what the famous preacher said. He says, a worthy walk before God will be marked by lowliness and gentleness, not pushy desires to defend our own rights and advance our own agenda. I'm going to read that again. Don't miss that. Here's what the preacher wrote. A worthy walk before God will be marked with lowliness and gentleness, not a pushy desire or to defend one's own right and advance their own agenda. Different people and other people should matter in your world. Different opinions and ideas should matter in your world. Let me say this in Ephesians 4. That's where we're going to be in Ephesians 4. Verses 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit of the bond of peace. There's one body, one Spirit, just as you were called into one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, and one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. But to each one of us, grace has been given according to the measure of Christ's gift. Now think about this. Paul is writing, he says, I beseech you. That is an urgent and a fervent calling for someone to do something, to respond. And Paul's starting this letter out by saying, I fervently want you to respond to this call of unity. It's emergency, it's a need, it's necessity. It's utmost important that we make sure that our calling is assured. Now notice this, he says, with lowlessness, gentleness, long-suffering, bearing with one another in love. Wow. How many of you think that those attitudes and the fruit of those spirits are what? They're unity, aren't they? That means I have to bear with one another who think different and look different and act different and who has a different idea than I do. That means other people matter. Now, people who don't agree with me, I consider them weird. But I can deal with that. No, I'm kidding. They matter. Those people who differ from me matter. And what is going to be my attitude toward that is long-suffering, gentleness, lowliness, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Far too long, I have heard this passage preached throughout the 30 years of my life in the church. You go anywhere and you travel anywhere, and many times anybody who's going to preach Ephesians chapter 4, they are so dogma about the unity of doctrine. We've got to believe in the one faith and the one Lord and the one baptism. And it's true, we do. We have unity in doctrine. But far too long, I have seen people and hear people preach Ephesians 4 that we are to have one in doctrine, one Lord. We have to agree, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father above all and all in all. But far too long, far often, I have seen the attitude of ugliness toward unity when it comes to our relationships. But we become dogmatic in Ephesians 4 about the unity of the Spirit doctrinally. And this isn't just talking about doctrinally, this is talking about what? To have the unity of the Spirit in attitude and relationships. Far too long, I have heard preachers only preach about the unity of doctrine in this passage, yet not the unity of the Spirit toward one another. And what does he say? He says, we are to keep the unity and the calling with which you are called, with lowliness and gentleness and long-suffering, bearing one another. Now, what is that calling in which you were called? What is that? We've been called to be saved. We've been called to be Christians. But also that calling is a bigger schedule, that is a bigger call. That means that we are to work together in unity. A people who has a diverse background, diverse opinions. There are a lot of people here this morning. I'm assuming that somebody has a different opinion about me. I'm sure that somebody has a different opinion of me. But we have different opinions about sports. We have some Ohio State fans. We have Michigan fans. I don't think there's any Michigan State fans. Couldn't be, is there? Oh, we got one. Far too long, we've only looked at this passage as doctrine alone. There is an attitude, as long as we agree that there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one body, one spirit, one hope, one God and Father of all, that we can be as ugly to one another as we want, that we can have poor attitudes toward one another, that we can be extremely rude one to another, and that we can attack one another, and in some way we still have unity. If that's how you handle this passage, you missed the boat. Let me say this, you might have missed the whole lake. In being a community with fellow Christians and fellow human beings, anybody remember Thomas Merton? He was the famous monk from Kentucky. And he wrote this: I cannot discover God in myself and myself in Him unless I have the courage to face myself exactly as I am, with all my limitations, and to accept others as they are, with all of their limitations. Living in unity as a church community is important in helping advance the gospel. When we look in Genesis chapter 2, God says it's not good for man to be alone. God says it's not good for man to be alone. Well, I'm a loner. It's not good. Do you know what being a loner does? It works. Yeah, being a loner works. You know why? Because I can't get along with anybody else, but I can get along with me because I always agree with me. Yeah, I don't have to argue with people. Really, it works. It really does. I don't have to put up with anybody's differences. I don't have to put up with any different attitudes, any different backgrounds, any different thoughts. Just being by myself works because I agree with me and I don't agree with anybody else. Here's the problem. Your life has no impact on others. And that's the call that God has called us in Ephesians chapter 4, is that the unity among the body of Christ, that we work and we complement and we impact other people. Does our life impact other people in a positive way? He said it's not good for Adam to be alone. The people of God under the new covenant are not meant to be alone. In the West, individualism has played a role on how society functions. Everything is about what you as a person can be. What you as a person can be. I can be a track star. I can be a basketball star. I can do this and I can do that. I can be American's Idol. I can be thin. I can be pretty. I can be cute. I can do these things. You see, it's the Western culture that has forced us and thrown us into this individualism idea that does nothing but hurt. Rarely is the concept of community good preached for many voices of the culture. In his book, Reverse Thunder, The Revelation of John and the Praying Imagination, Eugene Peterson writes, the gospel is never for individuals, but always for a people. Sin fragments us, separates us, and sentences us to a solitary confinement. The gospel, it restores us, it unites us, it sets us up as a community. We become a people of faith. It's a life of faith revealed and nurtured in the biblical narratives and higher personal, but never merely individual. Always there is a family, always there is a tribe, always there is a nation, and always there is a church. God's love and salvation are revealed and experienced in the congregation of the people. I've even challenged elders in our meeting, don't use the word I. Don't say things like, well, I prefer. Because leadership is not about what we prefer. Leadership is what's best for the people, the whole people, all the people, even the ones that are a little weird. It's about them. Why? Because people matter. People matter. Why are you pushing your own agenda? Why are you pushing your own thoughts or what you want? Why? Leadership should always be concerned about sheep, not themselves. Well, I don't want to get up and feed the sheep. Well, they need to be fed. Well, I don't want to get up and direct the sheep. Okay, well, sheep, you can walk off of a cliff. They're not very smart. They need direction. You see, the point is that we as shepherds should have an interest in sheep, even though sheep stink sometimes. Sometimes the shepherds stink, right? It's based on our attitude toward other people. This is the unity that God is calling us to. You know, in the mid-2000s, how many of you are old enough to remember the mid-2000s? Some of you are so young in here. They began this new keep up with the times thing called streaming worship services. And it wasn't out of a necessity, it was keeping up with the times. This was the new idea that we were just going to stream the services. We're going to keep up with the times. Now in 2019, 2020, with the advent of social distancing and the need to keep COVID-19 from spreading, churches moved to an online out of necessity. This move has abruptly reminded many of the need to meet as a church community. I remember Tina saying that often. Boy, I just miss being together as the church. I just miss being together as the church. She'd say, oh man, I just miss the fellowship of the church. While some probably thought, this is great, I don't have to be with the people of the church. Why? Because they're different. Why? Because they're a bit weird. Why? Because they don't think like I do. Why? Because they have a different background. You see, while all of this, one can attend church online. The problem is, it's a disembodied experience. It's a disembodied experience that God has called us. Just you and the screen. I always called it doing Jesus in jammies. Doing Jesus in jammies. You see, because then if I can just watch it on the screen, I don't have to dress up because nobody sees me. I can just stay in my jammies. I don't have to do my hair because nobody sees me. I don't have to. What do we keep saying? I. And that's not what God's desire is about the community. Just you and the screen, no physical presence or no interaction. Christ was embodied in human flesh. So the point is why did Christ have to come in human flesh? I mean, if he was with Daniel and he was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, why would he have to be born in Bethlehem in a manger, in a horse trough or a cow trough? Why? Why did he have to come in human flesh? The community meeting together physically to worship is the physical embodied proof of Christ incarnate. Here's a poem I'd like to share with you. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if a premonitory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or of thy own were, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind and themselves never want to know for the whom it tells for thee. Think about how much we are part of one another, even in different facets, in different ways of a community. Some of us, we've raised our kids together. Some of us, we share occupation together. Some of us work at the same place. Some of us have different clubs that we're part of. We share in totally different ways, but in many ways are we connected. Building a unified church community takes time. Here's ways that we can build a better community. First of all, put yourself aside. Put yourself aside. Step outside of your own issues, swallowing that lump of pride within your own throat. Reach out to the person that's beside you. Reach out to your neighbor. Reach out to the new person that attends church. Get out of your comfort zone and reach out. One gentleman was telling the story about how he visited a church, and how they did it is they asked everybody to stand, and if whoever's first time it was to visit remained seated, so everybody could see the people that were seated, to comfort them and welcome them and introduce themselves to them. And one guy stood there and he felt totally humiliated because no one ever went up to him and introduced themselves. And he says one lady looked at him eye to eye quickly and then turned away and did not introduce herself. It might be because we have bought into the individualism. We've bought into isolationism. We've bought into myself, what I'm comfortable with, what I like. Could you imagine Jesus having that attitude on the cross when he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free, yet he died alone for you and me? Not only put yourself aside, but be willing to put in the time. Relationships and community takes time. Take time to engage. Don't be pushy to get people to agree with your ideas so then you have a friendship. Take time and don't be pushy for your agenda. Take time to ask questions about their week, their job, the fun things that they do. Have you ever met someone or you ever talked to someone, the only thing that they want to accomplish is for you to hear what they want to talk about? They want to talk more than they listen. And then when you start to talk, you realize that they're not really paying attention because they couldn't care any less about what you're saying. The only thing that they're focused on is how they can cut back in the conversation to talk to you more about them. You ever met people like that? God's given us 2 ears, right? To listen and 1 mouth to speak. Some people are really good talkers, but they're not very good listeners. Take time to listen and engage in someone else's life. Get to know about what makes them tick. Walk along people, not at them. Here's the problem. People have a struggle with walking along another group of people because they're disloyal. They don't know how. What I'm saying is, so I'm walking along with this group of people, and guess what? When they don't agree with me, they're going to back off. They're going to take off, and they're going to punt, and they're going to slander, and they're going to talk bad about me. And so, how do we engage in that? Because in a sense, we're wondering how loyal this group is going to be. Are they going to be the group through thick and thin? Are they going to be the group who only sticks with you as long as they agree? Jeff, we've been friends for 25 years. I'm convinced that we've experienced times that we didn't agree at all. But Jeff's loyal. Through thick and thin. I've even made Jeff so mad, even when he came and visited me, and I didn't even want him there. And he knew that. Probably because I told him that I didn't really want to talk to anybody. He was loyal. Loyalty through thick and thin matters. Disloyalty shows. It's hard for people to invest in people who promote disloyalty, who does not show a loyalty through thick and thin. It's hard to invest in that. So what we want to do is we want to give that loyalty. We want to invest in that. We want to promote that. And we want to do our best to be able to show our loyalty. We should not be the church who is walking at someone with a raised nostrils, with our raised fingers, shaking at someone. The church needs a reputation of having arms around the shoulders, walking together as everyone is facing challenges in life. As everyone is facing challenges in life. So building a unified church community takes time. It takes commitment from both leadership and members. Sometimes, as Sean Stevenson points out, the community stagnates because people worry about what others think of them and because they're unwilling to humble for the sake of the community. Have I ever engaged in something, just say, for example, VBS, and I knew that somebody who was working on VBS didn't like me? Just say. Just say maybe that's a fact. It's not hard to imagine, but just say. I can go to VBS and wonder, well, they don't like me. Well, they're mad at me. Well, they're thinking bad about me. And what am I doing? I am crippled. I'm stifled. I'm not thinking of the reason that I came. You see, I can set that aside and say, that's important. And you know how people read that? You know how people read that? Well, he don't care anyway. He don't care if I'm angry. He doesn't care what I think. He doesn't care. No, I'm setting that aside because you know what? That is not the purpose that I came, nor the reason. The purpose I came, the reason I came was to encourage kids and encourage families and be part of this and sing and count money. Right? We can't get caught up in all of that because the work of God continues to be stifled. We can't be walking around wondering who's mad at me and who's not mad at me and who's thinking different of me and all of these things. We can't do that. We've got work to do for the kingdom's sake. Why? Because people matter. People matter. We should not allow the community to be stagnated because we're worried about what other people think or because they're unwilling to be humble for the sake of the community. Everyone has to do their part. The insiders, the outsiders, in any church community, it needs our involvement. Stepping aside of our own issues, swallowing the lump of pride in our own throats and reaching out and hand to the person next to us. That's what begins the process of building a long-standing community together of believers. Some churches have a church pledge, a unity pledge, a common way of life its members agree to try to live by when join a particular church as members. For some, this might seem like overkill, but a church unity pledge, when done right with the love of patience, spells out how everyone involved in the community, from leadership to laity, is to act and behave in regard to one another and themselves. A church unity pledge will not keep problems out, but it lays a framework for how to deal with problems such as arguing amongst individual members, communication with leaderships, and so on. And so I want to close with this passage as we saw last week in Psalm 133. Remember, the Jews were all singing this song because it's songs. They were singing the song together as they were going up to Jerusalem. That's what a song of ascent means of David. They're all holding the words of this song and they're walking together. All different kinds of Jews coming to one road into Jerusalem and they're singing this song together. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head running down on the beard of Aaron running down on the edge of his garments. It is like the dew of Hermon descending upon the mountains of Zion, for there the Lord commanded the blessing, life evermore. Will you stand with me this morning?